The galaxy had long mistaken silence for consent. In the polished halls of the Galactic Concord, the great interstellar assembly of peace, the humans were known as courteous, brilliant, and oddly restrained. New to the galactic stage by comparison, they had earned their seat through technological innovation, clean trade agreements, and a curious sense of diplomacy that sometimes felt more like patience than weakness. They built hospitals on war-torn moons. They stabilized crumbling wormhole lanes without asking for territory. When pirates struck Concord routes, human patrols responded first and retreated last. Other species praised their tact, their control, called it evolution, maturity, but behind closed doors some whispered another word, timid, and so the testing began. At first, it was subtle. Small provocations, border incursions by lesser species, trade tariffs manipulated against human companies. The humans responded with firm statements and thicker contracts. But that didn't satisfy the architects of the Concord, you see. The Concord wasn't built to protect, it was built to control. And humans, with their limitless adaptability and unmatched creative aggression, frightened those who had grown comfortable in galactic dominance. The Kalari were the first to take initiative. A species of crystalline biology and hive-like political hierarchy, they had always found human behavior unreadable, chaotic, messy, inefficient, and chaos terrified the Kalari. They proposed a test. Not officially, of course. On paper it was. A scientific evaluation of planetary resilience under socio-political stress. In reality, it was bait. The target, Delta 4, a remote human colony of no military value, located on the outer rim near Kalari-controlled space. It had been a peaceful world agricultural, lightly defended, home to artists, families, thinkers. It produced more literature than ore, more culture than code. It was the kind of colony humanity prided itself on, peaceful, prosperous, and open. The Kalari sent warships cloaked as cargo convoys. They jammed communications, struck orbital arrays, and deployed atmospheric destabilizers to trigger storms over every major settlement. Ground troops followed, genetically engineered to resist non-lethal deterrence. They came not to conquer, but to maim, to push, to study. And they did so knowing the Concord would not intervene. They expected protests, of course, maybe a few sanctions. Perhaps even a stern speech from Earth's diplomatic envoy. What they did not expect was for the humans to watch for 3 full days before responding. That response came not from Earth, but from the colony itself. The planetary governor, a soft-spoken former teacher named Isaac, initiated a broadcast across every available Concord channel. No encryption, no formality, just one sentence, repeated in multiple languages. We are not subjects. We are not weak. We remember everything. Then the feed cut to footage raw and unfiltered. Kalari soldiers setting fire to a refugee shelter. Children screaming as glass-skinned invaders tore open emergency domes with plasma cutters. Human civilians tied to antenna arrays and used. As leverage for surrender, the footage lasted 12 minutes. It played for hours, across every Concord world. The horror was laid bare. Species who had long seen humans as predictable, polite contributors now watched them tortured on screens, helpless, humiliated. And in every embassy, in every meeting hall, one question rose unspoken between nervous glances. Why haven't they retaliated yet? Because humans held back. Because they always had. Because they still believed that rules mattered until now. 2 days after the footage went live, Earth went silent. Not diplomatically, but completely. Trade routes were severed, embassies were emptied, civilian traffic rerouted. Every known human colony withdrew from Concord communication channels. Stations that once emitted cheerful tourism broadcasts now pulsed with empty static. Surveillance stations near Sol picked up a massive energy signature emanating from the dark side of Mars. An old signature, one not seen in over 100 years. The Concord dismissed it, until ships started vanishing. Not human ships, Kalari. First a scout vessel, then a science barge. Then an entire convoy ferrying colonial tribute from 3 worlds. All disappeared from the registry without distress signals. The Kalari called for an emergency. Concord vote to demand answers, but no one answered, because they too had started losing ships, and not just to attacks. Some were found adrift, no signs of battle, no power signatures, but with entire crews missing. Hulls marked with cryptic symbols. In old Terran military code, some had data cores wiped clean, others had internal footage overwritten with single phrases, etched into walls, mirrors, consoles, still holding back. It was no longer a protest. What's a warning? But by then, it was too late. Delta 4's remains were discovered by a private Concord survey drone weeks after the attack. What they found was not a smoldering ruin, but an empty silence. Entire cities preserved in eerie stillness. Food half-eaten, books open on tables, a school bell frozen mid-ring, as if something had taken the people, not killed them, not destroyed them, just ... removed them. No bodies, no graves, no sign of resistance. And yet, not a single Kalari soldier remained alive. Their corpses were found beneath the planet's crust, in repurposed mining shafts, suspended in anti-decay fields, preserved, marked not, with human symbols, but with names. The names of every colonist lost on Delta 4. Names that were now etched into the internal memory banks of ships launching from deep orbit stations near Saturn. Ships with call signs long scrubbed from active duty lists. Ships that bore black holes and old Terran insignias scorched by time. No registry, no AI assistance, just silence, power, and purpose. The galaxy had broken the illusion, and the humans had begun unmaking it. Asterisk, the Galactic Concord didn't understand how close they had brought the galaxy to the edge. Or maybe they didn't, simply believed, as they always had, that the humans would keep swallowing insult after insult, smiling through bleeding lips. After all, they'd done it before. Humanity had endured economic sabotage, diplomatic isolation, and endless condescension from the elder species. They were too emotional, the Concord often said, too violent by nature, too primitive by instinct. Even after humans became indispensable, stabilizing unstable wormholes, pioneering singularity containment, even helping prevent the collapse of 3 dying star systems, they were treated like clever pets. But Delta 4 had changed something. The galaxy just didn't realize it yet. The Kalari's attack was meant to push boundaries, to test human reactions. They expected outrage, maybe a show of military force, some fleet exercises, a harshly worded address at the next summit. What they got instead was nothing. No retaliation, no fleet movement, threats, just silence. The Concord interpreted it as weakness. They gathered behind closed doors and congratulated each other. The humans are too fractured to respond, said one diplomat. Too soft, too civilized. They've outgrown their old instincts. And when the Lucent incident happened, they still didn't see it. The Lucent was a diplomatic vessel, small and symbolic, crewed by a dozen ambassadors and cultural officers. It carried no weapons, only words. It was en route to a neutral world for mediation. Talks with the Kalari and 2 observer species. It never arrived. Only fragments were recovered, a few torn panels floating along the fringes of a gravitational slipstream. An ambassador's hand still gripping a pen, perfectly frozen in vacuum. Initial investigations suggested piracy, but deep scan analysis showed otherwise. The Lucent had been intercepted inside, protected space stripped from the inside. Its crew executed systematically, one by one. The Kalari denied involvement, but the final log of the ship's AI was recovered from a hidden memory core. It played only one message, looped over and over, voice broken and static-laced. We asked for peace. They gave us silence. Then they gave us pain. The footage was not broadcast publicly. It was shown in a closed Concord Session 1 that included Earth's last diplomat, Ambassador Lane. He watched the clip once. Then he stood, and for the first time in human diplomatic history, he said nothing. He simply gathered his things and walked out of the chamber. That evening, Earth officially severed all remaining ties with the Concord in the days that followed. Strange things began to happen. Entire Terran science stations fully staffed and operational disappeared from their coordinates without distress signals. Terraforming satellites went dark, but no debris was ever found. Human colonies began locking down their orbital ports, refusing entry to foreign trade vessels. The AI cores aboard Sol's long-range signal relays stopped transmitting Concorde frequencies altogether. Instead, they cycled endlessly through a single encoded phrase: Protocol Orpheus, initiated. No one in the Concorde archives could decrypt it. Not even the Dravari, the memory keepers of ancient code. The phrase didn't appear in any standard Earth military framework, but the oldest Concorde historians knew it, buried in obsolete records from the time of the Terran collapse. The term Orpheus had only one association: do not send diplomats. Do not negotiate. This is not a call for war. This is a notice of one already in progress. The Coeri, still smug from Delta IV's fall, chose to ignore the signs. They declared the disappearance of the Lucent a human fabrication and issued a call for preemptive sanctions. They threatened to seize remaining Terran colonies near their borders. What they didn't know was that those colonies were already gone, evacuated, emptied, because humanity had stopped thinking in terms of diplomacy. They were thinking in terms of positions, vulnerabilities, angles of approach, and then the isolation began, not with fleets or invasions, but with erasure. First, the Kalari relay net collapsed. Communications between their core worlds went silent. The Concorde sent a recon vessel to investigate. It arrived at the edge of the Kalari's central hub to find a planet-sized cloud of nanite debris where a satellite constellation had once existed. Next, the Kalari's Second Armada, a pride, a fleet of over 400 warships, disappeared en route to a patrol exercise. No distress calls. No escape pods. Just a final one-frame sensor ping captured by a third-party observer. A Terran dreadnought emerging from a spatial fold. Its black hull reflecting zero light, marked with no flag only, the remnants of an ancient, burned-in serial number. Then, the Terran blackout zone formed. A triangle of unapproachable space stretching from Vega, 9 to Hadrils. Halo 2, the dying star Pelrose, where any Concorde vessel that entered was simply removed, not destroyed, not attacked, removed, no radiation, no wreckage, no data. Like stepping into myth, the galaxy began to understand. It wasn't just that humans were retaliating. It was that they were doing so with precision. With a plan that had clearly been in place for decades, waiting to be activated, they hadn't stopped being nice. They had simply run out of reasons to pretend they were. By the end of that cycle, Concorde High Councils were in chaos. Emergency meetings devolved into shouting matches. Entire species declared neutrality. Some denounced the Kalari, others called for containment measures. But Earth didn't attend those meetings anymore, and the few Concorde diplomats who dared approach the outer Sol perimeter found only silence. Or, in one case, a simple message etched into a satellite hull with no known tool. You watched them? Burn, you said nothing, we are done asking. The Concorde had spent centuries controlling outcomes through bureaucracy and protocol. They never planned for what would happen if one of its youngest, most brilliant species simply walked away from the tableland, returned to its roots. Now they watched with growing dread, because the galaxy didn't just need humans present to be stable. It needed humans holding back. And now, they weren't asterisk. No. One could pinpoint the exact moment fear overtook diplomacy. It might have been when the Kalari Armada went silent and entire. A battle group of elite warships vanishing without sensor echoes, without debris, without a whisper of emergency signals? Or perhaps it was when the Concorde's emergency recon drone sent a single image before its feed was severed. A human dreadnought, kilometers long, half submerged in a black nebula, watching the stars, not moving, not pursuing, just waiting like something that knew it had already won. What remained of the Concorde High Council began to unravel behind closed doors. Species that had not blinked at planetary wars or economic collapse now refused to leave their home. Systems Meetings once held in ornate halls became encrypted broadcasts. Delegates left chairs empty for safety reasons. Even the most war-hardened among them, like the reptilian Thrask or the machine-bound Bellari, had begun to deactivate border probes in Terran sectors. No one wanted to look. No one wanted to know what humanity was building in the dark. And no. Not one government, fleet, or intelligence agency was willing to provoke them further. But the Kalari refused to accept the shift. Still blinded by pride, it doubled down. The attack on Delta IV, once hailed as a necessary correction, was rebranded internally as a defensive preemptive strike. They dismissed human silence as strategic weakness. They dismissed the erasure of their fleets as coincidence, anomalies, or Concord sabotage. A few even suggested the humans had fabricated the entire sequence of losses using holograms and planted data. This illusion of control lasted precisely until the wall fell. The wall was not a literal structure. It was the name given to the defense line Theta, fortified chain of stations along the Kalari's inner spina region of space, meant to serve as an unbreachable barrier between their core worlds and external threats. It had never been tested. In a real war, humanity changed that. No declaration was made. No fleets approached. Concord received no distress calls. All that arrived across every galactic relay simultaneously was a short, looped broadcast from within one of the stations. Grainy feed, colorless and flickering. A corridor wall scorched. Lights flickering. A single figure walking down the hallway in heavy armor-Terrian Black Ops plating. The kind banned by Concord treaties after the collapse era. The figure didn't speak. Behind it, the stations. Crew lay still in, bloodied, untouched. Just ... collapsed. Silent. The figure stopped in front of the camera, reached up and removed its helmet. A face. Human. Eyes like cold fire. A vertical scar across the brow. It's unhealed. Calm. Measured. Not angry. Just finished waiting. Then the feed cut. When Concord rescue ships finally arrived 12 hours later, they found the entire Theta line completely offline. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Simply rendered inert. Every station. Every ship. Every system, as if someone had turned off the entire border and walked through it. Kalari space was now exposed, and no one rushed to defend it. Earth still hadn't spoken. No response to Concord envoys, no political statements, no retaliation claims, just silence. But this silence now felt different, heavier, intentional. It was a silence designed to make the galaxy listen to its own heartbeat and wonder if it would still be there tomorrow. Humanity had withdrawn from public view, but not from action. Their borders were sealed. Civilian traffic rerouted to isolated corridors patrolled by old automated defense units, some bearing forgotten Terran flags, some marked only with serial numbers too damaged to trace, and then the sightings began. Civilian freighters caught glimpses of unfamiliar ships, triangular, plated with matte black holes, leaving no ion trails, moving without warp distortions. Stations reported sudden system-wide power fluctuations, followed by the discovery of newly installed defensive code that matched no modern database, but bore Terran genetic encryption markers. It was clear now, humanity had not retreated. They had activated, inside Sol. Something even stranger occurred. For centuries, the system had been under constant surveillance. Not officially, of course, but every major Concord species had installed passive monitoring probes along the outer rings. They recorded traffic, trade volume, and the curious rhythms of Earth's silence. Now, one by one, those probes began transmitting the same message. A pulse. 3 beats. Then 5 seconds of silence. Then it repeated. The Concord assumed it was interference until a decrypted human archive was discovered referencing an identical pulse pattern. Code enclosure status. Translation. No one gets in. No one gets out. All violations will be interpreted as an attack. That was when panic truly set in. The council debated a formal request for clarification. Earth responded by cutting off the Concorde's diplomatic AI from every Terran network in known space. Not crashing, it just locking it out, like a parent locking the liquor cabinet. One Concorde diplomat said it best: "The humans are not moving aggressively. They're moving with finality. This isn't war. This is what comes after diplomacy dies." And still, through all of this, humanity remained publicly silent. But it wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of someone who'd already made their decision. The wall hadn't just fallen. It had been pulled down from the inside. And the rest of the galaxy now stood outside, wondering if they were next. Asterisk, it began as whispers. First in the outer sectors places, where the Concorde's authority thinned, and independent worlds ran on grit, trade, and rumor. Station operators who had once rolled their eyes at Terran caution now leaned in close when freight runners spoke of the black ships. Entire mining outposts went dark overnight, not because they'd been attacked, but because they had seen something they shouldn't have. One transmission, intercepted and spread quietly through back channels, came from a mercenary crew orbiting Delta Orionis Vi. The audio was corrupted, but the final line was unmistakable. "We locked weapons on it. It didn't lock back, just ... waited. Like, it knew we wouldn't shoot." The crew was never heard from again, the same week. A diplomatic station along the Jernari border picked up a ghost signal. Bursts of binary code emitted in Terran encryption format. Each burst, once decoded, was a name, thousands of names. A roster of those lost on Delta IV children. Scientists, farmers, at first. The message was dismissed as a hoax, until the final line of the transmission changed. "We remember each one, do you?" Suddenly everyone did, and fear began to spread. The type born from immediate danger, but the kind that takes root in the mind and festers. The kind that breaks empires before the first shot is fired, even among the elder species. There were no countermeasures for this kind of warfare, because it wasn't war in the traditional sense. It was reputation turned into weaponry. It was memory sharpened into a blade. It was the kind of fear that outlives battles and lives in bloodlines. The Kaleri, now isolated and exposed, pleaded for Concorde intervention. Their fleets were gone, their defenses unresponsive, their core systems unstable. They submitted evidence, hundreds of pages of documents, data records, political justifications, all trying to paint themselves as misunderstood, misled, as misinformed. But it was too late for paperwork. The Concorde's other members, terrified of being associated with them, cut diplomatic ties. Former allies redrew borders. Entire trade routes were rerouted to avoid Kaleri territory. Not because they were dangerous, but because being near them now felt like standing too close to a falling structure. A few brave species demanded action. "Must stop the Terrans before they escalate," cried the Valari envoy, its voice filtered through synthetic vocalizers. This is a show of unchecked force. But no one moved, because they weren't sure if the Terrans had already escalated and if what they'd seen so far was merely a prelude. The worst realization came not from military analysts or fleet strategists, but from historians. In dusty archives, beneath layers of bureaucracy, researchers began uncovering long-buried reports from the Terran collapse. Accords dismissed for generations as overblown or mythological. There, they found stories of entire star systems rendered uninhabitable, not by brute force, but by precision. Human warships had not always used overwhelming numbers or even superior weapons. They had used understanding. They knew ecosystems, supply chains, cultural weaknesses. They would destabilize the moons around a world, break its tides, force migrations, strain civil infrastructure, and then disappear. No conquest. It's just entropy. Back then, the galaxy called it barbarism. Now, they saw it for what it truly was, restraint broken, and it was happening again. On the commercial front, corporations panicked. Trade of souls ceased completely. Human currency markets were frozen. Mega conglomerates tied to Terran tech suddenly lost access to software licenses, manufacturing protocols, even hardware. Entire industries went dark overnight. Artificial intelligence? Programs built on Terran neural frameworks suddenly failed basic reasoning protocols. Agricultural systems running off human genetic templates ceased functioning without their encrypted database access. It was as if humanity had reached into the galaxy's bloodstream and clenched a fist. No threat. No warning. Just a slow, deliberate choke. The message was clear. You built your future on our foundations. You assumed we'd never take it back. Now they were. And yet still, Earth said nothing. There were no interviews. No public addresses. No flags raised. No ultimatums issued, just the deepening, spreading realization that everything the Concord had dismissed as Terran potential was now Terran certainty. Some governments began to draft emergency policies. Others fell into chaos. In border regions, panic led to riots. On academic worlds, philosophy departments went dark, afraid that what they had preached about post-war humanity had been wrong all along. They hadn't evolved past violence. They had simply been holding the line. And now, with that line gone, the only thing left was reckoning. In the heart of the Concord capital, a station orbiting the gas giant, Leon 5, final thread began to snap. The central council chambers, once brimming with pride and posturing, sat half empty. Delegates arrived behind security details. Surveillance drones hovered over every entrance. Political enemies who once vied for favor now huddled in mutual fear, because no one could predict what Earth would do next. That's what terrified them. The most war they understood. It had rules, boundaries, endpoints. But this wasn't war. This was a species that had remembered who it was, what it had lost and what it was still capable of. A species that had tolerated enough and hushed. Tone's story spread.
Some factual,
some embellished. A mining crew found a Terran beacon buried inside a dead moon set to activate if any Concord ship came within 10,000 kilometers. It didn't explode. It didn't broadcast. Just turned on, glowed red, and began counting. Backward from 10. They left the system immediately. A freighter passing near the old Corian drift claimed they were intercepted by an unmanned Terran ship. It matched speed, scanned them, transmitted a single phrase, "Not yet," and then vanished into a gravity well like a ghost slipping beneath the waves. Every species, every faction, every sentient being in the known galaxy now told one another the same thing in different words, translated 1,000 ways: do not provoke the humans. Do not test them again. Do not wake what they buried. Because when they did, the humans didn't roar. They simply stood up, and the universe, for the first time in 1,000 years, flinched. Asterisk, there were rumors, always rumors, about what humanity had built during the collapse. The Concord, in its arrogance, had dismissed most of them as ghost stories. Myths created by a young, ambitious species, still obsessed with its violent adolescence, war machines buried in dead moons, biosoldiers, sealed in cryo-sleep, shipyards hollowed into asteroids, operating without contact or resupply. Most were filed under speculative fiction and sealed in cultural archives. And yet, in a bunker beneath the polar crust of Celsius 3, a long-dormant proximity relay began to pulse. The signal was primitive, analog, a pulse that matched no Concord protocol. It was Terran Cold Command, and with that pulse, Orpheus Node A9 came online. For decades, its systems had been silent, sustained only by passive geothermal feeds and ancient failsafes. Then, one by one, systems reactivated. Power flowed. Atmosphere was restored. Chambers hissed open. Data crawled through rusted lines like breath returning to lungs. The protocols were old pre-Concord, pre-unification. It had been written in a time when Earth was on fire, surrounded by collapsing alliances and hostile species. Back when survival wasn't a strategy, it was an obsession, and the files still existed. They were called the holdback projects. Each holdback site had been built with one mandate: if we ever fall, you are the ember. If we ever rise, you are the fire. These were not fleets held in reserve. They were plans, prototypes, and principles warfare, not as a tactic, but as a legacy. They were the Terran solution to a galaxy they didn't trust, written in steel. Sealed in silence and buried where even humans might forget them. Now, they were waking up. At Outpost Null, orbiting a brown dwarf without a name, 6 orbital rings spun up for the first time in 2 centuries. Each one housed a different class of experimental drone, swarm miners, its atmospheric disruptors, and surgical strike platforms. Most had never been tested in open war. They didn't need to be. Their designs were based on psychological dominance. As much as firepower, one Concord scout ship tried to approach. Outpost-Null. It vanished from tracking within 23 seconds. Only one message remained in its log buffer. Proximity violation detected. Holdback assets remain dormant. This is your only warning. The message wasn't sent in anger, it was calibrated. On the surface of Europa, deep beneath the frozen crust, another holdback project came to life. Project Lancer. The facility had been thought abandoned since the artificial war, built to house early gravitic weapon prototypes and directional singularity engines. It had been decommissioned during the peace treaties, but peace was never guaranteed. Inside Project Lancers, Vault's prototypes blinked awake. Blueprints unfolded. Weapon matrices scanned for updates. One AI core named Solace resumed operations after 177 years. Its first question, is Earth still sovereign? Second, are they watching? Then it activated 6 beacon towers in Terran space. Each one sent out a low-band signal, broadcasting a rotating frequency wave that translated. In every language used across the Concord, you had your turn. Now it's ours. Across the stars, evidence of the holdback protocols began to surface. Ships of unknown class triangular, heat-absorbing, zero-emission, began to appear near Concord trade routes. They never attacked. They simply moved with patience, holding position just outside defensive perimeters, observing. The Concord's most advanced AI surveillance systems couldn't track them once they engaged drive coils. Their armor bore no paint, no serials, no identification. But the way they moved, the way they circled capital ships like sharks without teeth showing, was unmistakably human. At Ds1, corporate world once praised for its neutrality, a Terran Ghost Fleet emerged from a nearby dark sector. Every system on the planet went dark within 5 minutes. Then came the rain, not bombs. Hard drives, thousands of them, dropped into the upper atmosphere in ablative containers, designed to survive re-entry. They scattered across cities, crash-landing into streets, courtyards, rooftops. Inside each drive was the full, redacted record of Delta 4. Everything. Surveillance footage, audio, internal memos, Concord votes. The truth. The Concord had called. It had an unfortunate escalation, a miscommunication. Terrans now called it murder, and they made sure everyone knew. Then came the voice. The galaxy had waited anxiously for Earth to speak, to offer demands, to deliver ultimatums. For leaders in polished uniforms to stand behind podiums and explain their position. Instead, across every Concord channel, on every screen, terminal, and relay, a voice played, calm, human, without anger, just conviction. We are not coming to negotiate. We are not coming to argue over borders or trade or history. Okay. We are coming to finish a story you thought we forgot. There was a pause. Then the final line echoed like a slow hammer strike on the bones of every government official listening. We held back so the galaxy could grow. You mistook that for weakness. We will not correct you again. In Concord space, alliances shattered. Entire species declared neutrality. Not out of loyalty or political stance, but out of survival. Peace treaties were rewritten with escape clauses. Trade agreements were burned. Refugee fleets left core sectors for fringe space, hoping to avoid the eye of the storm, for they all knew this was not humanity coming for conquest. This was everything they had built, turning from the shadows, and it was not angry. It was methodical. Asterisk, the galaxy didn't end in fire. It ended in silence. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that falls just before judgment is passed. The kind that follows a verdict no one expected to hear spoken aloud by the time the first official act of retaliation began. Most of the galaxy already knew it wasn't the beginning. It was the middle. Everything before had been warning shots test. Runs, measured responses, demonstrations. What came next wasn't for the Concord. It wasn't for the Kalari. It wasn't even for vengeance. It was for clarity. The Terrans didn't move with rage. There was no frenzy. There was no fanfare. They moved with intention. The first target was Riven Spire, a moon-sized artificial ring world constructed by the Concord as a cultural hub, home to 50 million civilians and the regional Concord archives. A beacon of unity, the symbol of the interspecies alliance. And, as the records would later confirm, the place where the authorization to sanction Delta IV's erasure was first voted into motion. The Terrans did not bombard the station. They did not hack it. They did not send fleets. They sent a voice. A woman's voice, soft and clear, spoke from every terminal. Display an emergency broadcast system across Riven Spire. No video. No threat. Just one sentence. You had a hand in what happened on Delta IV. You chose silence. You chose convenience. Now you will understand what silence truly means. Within 3 seconds of the final word, the entire station's core collapsed. Inward imploded, not exploded, crumpling like paper under an invisible weight. The Terrans hadn't fired a shot. Later analysis showed they had remotely triggered dormant fail-safes in the station's artificial gravity stabilizers, a system designed by Terran engineers 2 generations ago, one they'd never really given away. The station folded into itself in 12 seconds. There were no survivors, and across the galaxy, the message was clear. No structure is sacred. Is safe, and no one is beyond consequence. The next act came not in a blast, but in a conversation. At Virith's station, high above the neutral trade world of Karnos, a group of Concord officials boarded what appeared to be a diplomatic Terran shuttle. There were no weapons. No escorts. Inside, they found a lone human envoy, unarmed, unarmored, unafraid. They asked him what humanity wanted. They begged for terms. They tried to explain how things had spiraled. The envoy simply handed them a data crystal. When they opened it, the system locked down. Holographic images filled the chamber footage of Concord counselors, voting to delay relief to Delta IV, recordings of intercepted Kolari transmissions laughing about human softness, files showing economic blackouts enforced quietly against human colonies that had protested for aid. One of the Concord's envoys broke down in tears. The Terran didn't speak again. He left the shuttle. It departed without lights, vanishing into a warp rift without coordinates. And when the Concord officials returned to their station, they found their personal accounts, property records, and social platforms erased. Their digital existence was gone. No finances, no history, no identity. One message blinked in their vision implants. You will not be remembered. That was the new kind of warfare. Not occupation, not domination. Racier. One system at a time, humanity didn't leave. Ashes, they left nothing. The Kalari were next. But they were not destroyed. They were isolated. The Terrans activated blockade. Raise artificial gravity nets stretching millions of kilometers across space. Unmanned, undetectable, but absolute. Nothing came in. Nothing came out. Trade ceased. Power grids failed. Satellites fell from orbit. They were left alone, with their silence. With the faces of those they had tormented on Delta IV flickering in the dark on looped broadcasts. With the knowledge that humanity wasn't seeking submission, they were demanding reflection. And the Kalari screamed into a vacuum that no longer acknowledged them. The Dravari, who had supplied the Kalari during their operation, were more subtle. In their sins, but no less complicit. Their homeworlds woke to find every orbital shipyard offline. Every construction drone scrambled with code written in long-dead human dialects. Generations of economic progress paused. Not hacked, not attacked. Just shut down by someone who still had the master keys. And in their skies, just visible in low orbit, a fleet of Terran ships floated, shadows completely still, watching. They stayed for 3 days. then they vanished. The Dravari did not speak of what they saw. But they never built another warship. On Hallam's Reach, a neutral colony world known for banking and political secrecy, over 400 exiled Concord officials found themselves locked out of their systems, not arrested, not threatened, just forgotten, their accounts deleted. Their escape ships launched into deep space on autopilot. Their planetary citizenship revoked in all databases. Their DNA profiles scrambled. Their own doors wouldn't open for them. The Terrans left them alive, nurse. By the time that Concord Council officially disbanded, an emergency vote held. In secret and confirmed only by a few decrypted leaks, most of the galaxy had already accepted a new truth. There would be no negotiation. There would be no peace talks. It would only be remembrance, consequence. Humanity didn't want power. They wanted balance. And that balance now rested on a knife's edge sharpened by history, memory, and patience that had finally run out. In orbit of Earth, a single message played from a rotating satellite. This could be heard on every channel and every frequency, translated into every tongue. It was the first and last public statement Earth would issue. You taught us fear. You taught us silence. Now, you will learn what grows in silence. You will learn what we become when we stop holding back. The war didn't end with a surrender. There was no formal declaration, no final battle, no treaty to ratify. The galaxy had been trained to think of peace as something earned through diplomacy or dictated at the barrel of a weapon. But the Terrans had redefined the very idea of ending, because this wasn't peace. This was silence weaponized, deliberate, permanent. And it began with withdrawal. Humanity didn't stay to conquer. They didn't occupy systems, rewrite governments, or install rulers. They simply left. One by one, their ships broke formation and vanished into fold space. Leaving only the wreckage of arrogance and memory in their wake, entire fleets retreated to deep space. Terran colonies, once open and bustling, shut their gates. Stations once reliant on galactic trade turned inward, growing their own food, forging their own metals. Communication went dark. Borders became undefined. From the outside, it looked like retreat, but those who had seen the storm understood. It wasn't retreat, it was containment. The Concord tried to rebuild in pieces, but without consensus or credibility. Every attempt to draft a Terran engagement protocol ended in fear-fueled arguments or silence. Former Concord members sent envoys to Earth pleading for talks, unreturned, and in every capital, in every military war room, in every classroom that dared speak of Earth, one question echoed louder than all others. What if they come back? But humanity never left. They simply stopped being seen. The stars above border systems grew quieter. Probes vanished. Shadow signatures danced on long-range sensors and disappeared. Entire systems registered brief, phantom energy readings. To terrify, never enough to track. On Arask Prime, a world that once publicly mocked human emotional fragility, its planetary AI core abruptly began playing Terran music through civilian terminals. Songs from Earth's past, ancient violins, choral hymns, blues soaked in longing. When the planetary governor ordered a system-wide reset, the AI replied in perfect Terran English, "You remember the pain, we remember the melody, the music." Played for 7 days, no one touched it again. Years passed. Generations of non-human species grew up hearing the stories. In childhood hallas, the Terrans became monsters. In underground circles, they became gods. In military academies, they became case studies. No single species forgot what had happened, because humanity hadn't just rewritten the rules of war, they had redefined. Fear, not as a reaction to pain, but as a consequence of being ignored. On the edge of the Varelian Reach, a young starship commander of a minor mining species found herself stranded after a fuel cell malfunction. Her distress signal drifted unanswered for 3 days, till a vessel appeared, no signature, no transponder, just a matte black hull without seams. It didn't dock, didn't hail. It simply deployed a small, unmarked fuel canister via drone. Then, it turned and vanished. Inside the drone's casing, along with the canister, was a note burned into old carbon paper. It read, "You weren't the enemy. Just don't become one." No one ever spoke publicly about that encounter, but mining guilds near the Reach began quietly enforcing new policies. No exploitation of Terran-flagged ruins, no salvage of black-holed vessels, and no interference with quiet systems. They called it the Gray Zone Doctrine. Unofficial, unenforced, but unbroken. Far from galactic eyes, Sol became a myth. Telescopes failed to focus on it. Probes launched toward the system malfunctioned. Mid-flight or went blind at the heliopause. Gravity signatures registered impossible spikes, then vanished. It was as if the solar system had folded in on its self-sealed vault of silence. Yet trade routes warped around it. Spacefarers adjusted courses. Not out of obligation, but out of respect. Out of fear. Out of the understanding that humans didn't want to be disturbed, and if they were, no one knew what would come next. Back on Earth, in places untouched by war and untouched by time, there were no banners, no medals, no parades. Children played in gardens, unaware that the universe had changed in the deep bunkers of Mars. Fleet officers reviewed classified files with no intention of using them. Orbital factories on Titan hummed quietly, building nothing yet staying active just in case. And at the center of the planet's most secure AI cluster, an interface pulsed with ambient awareness. A question blinked across a terminal every 36 hours. Do they remember? The AI always responded, yes, and that's enough. The galaxy spun on. Trade resumed. Empires rose and fell. But a void remained in the heart of the stars, a gravity well of caution, shaped not by presence but by the possibility of return. New civilizations would sometimes stumble across the old records, Delta IV, the Kalari blockade, the Erasure fleets. Some dismissed them as legends. Others studied them in silence, eyes wide with realization, because the truth was always the same. The Terrans had once walked among the stars, with open hands and hopeful hearts, and the galaxy had crushed that hope. So, the humans left, not to hide, not to forget, but to watch and wait. And so every species in the galaxy, young and old, powerful and meek still, teaches the same final lesson in every language. Never forget what happened when the humans stopped holding back. Because in the end, they didn't burn the galaxy to the ground. They did something far more terrifying. They made it miss them.